My name's Richard Johnson, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer and the founder of Upperton Pharma Solutions. So, by definition, I've been working at Upperton for the last 26 years. The company was founded in 1999. Basically, my background is very much in that sort of early stage formulation development of pharmaceutical products. So, for example, I've done a lot of work in formulating tablets and capsules for oral delivery, but also a lot of work in the formulation of pulmonary products, so products for delivery to the lung, and also products for delivery into the nose. So I've got well over 30 years of experience in the CDMO sector, and during that time I've formulated a vast array of different types of molecules, from typical small molecules through to much larger biologics. But I've always had a particular interest in developing dry powder dosage forms and using various particle engineering technologies to help improve the delivery of drugs and other molecules. So as I say, I've been at Upperton since 1999 when I founded the company, based in Nottingham in the Midlands in the UK. And we're very much a CDMO working right across all dosage forms, developing products from early formulation development right through to clinical and now commercial manufacture here in Nottingham. Basically, when we talk about inhaled formulations, there's a tendency to put together nasal dosage forms and pulmonary dosage forms into one group. We're saying we're inhaling them, but in reality, those two dosage forms are very different, and we're actually targeting different areas of the body. So for inhaled drugs that are going into the lung, pulmonary delivery, we're looking to deposit a drug deep into the lung. For nasal drug products, we're trying to avoid inhalation into the lung. Primarily, we're looking to dose into the nasal anatomy. So really, for me, the two different dosage forms are quite different. We're targeting different organs or different areas of the body. And today, I was really going to focus primarily on nasal drug delivery and some of the exciting new developments and challenges that are coming from this new and exciting growing area of drug delivery. And in terms of some of the recent key advances, it's been phenomenal here at Upperton to see the growth in nasal drug delivery. And it's been driven by some really interesting, exciting new developments. And I can probably break those down into targeting, for example, targeting into different parts of the nose, devices and formulations that can target specific regions of the nose, like the olfactory region, for nose to brain delivery, delivering molecules into the brain directly from the nose, a really new and exciting growing area. But also some of the more general delivery into the nasal anatomy, where we're looking to deliver drugs for systemic delivery. And this is a huge growing area, and there's been an explosion in recent approvals for drugs that are being delivered into the nose to achieve systemic delivery. And that's really driving a lot of this growth and interest in nasal drug delivery. So some real interesting key developments. Another development or another key area, new area that's really grown in the last sort of 2 or 3 years is the development of dry powder dosage forms for nasal drug delivery. Traditionally, nasal drug products tend to be liquids, which you can spray into the nose, really to treat diseases of the nasal anatomy or deliver, for example, drugs to avoid things like allergic rhinitis. But now people are looking to deliver drugs into the nose for local and systemic delivery. And the emergence of dry powder devices is enabling us to deliver a much wider range of different types of drugs now. And we're now talking of more complex and new drug formulations containing biologics, for example, oligonucleotides, proteins, vaccines, a whole new array of drugs that are now being delivered nasally for local and systemic delivery. So really exciting areas around formulation, types of molecules, and new devices. It's such a fast moving and interesting area. And here at Upperton, we're working right across those different fields. Yeah, again, I'm focusing now primarily on nasal drug delivery, and for these types of what we refer to as next generation molecules, we're talking about more complex, larger molecules, particularly biologics. And biologics is such a broad term; it can cover everything from a peptide molecule to a much larger oligonucleotide or protein, a monoclonal antibody, a vaccine, which can be a mixture of proteins and adjuvants. So all of these much larger, more complex molecules can now be delivered into the nose using some of these next generation devices that are being developed. But really, one of the big challenges of developing a nasal formulation with these much larger biologic formulations is all around stability and the ability to maintain a product in a stable form. And quite often with these biologics, if you have an aqueous solution or a solution of the biologic, that biologic, you can't put it into a solvent for delivery. It's got to go into the nose, either in an aqueous solution, but in that aqueous solution, it can be quite unstable. But now with these new next generation devices, we're seeing the emergence of dry powder formulations, and these dry powder formulations are much more stable. So dry powder formulations that can be delivered in a dry powder device really has massively increased the interest in delivery of these biologics into the nose. So being able to take a very sensitive and unstable biologic, formulate it as a dry powder, engineer it to the right particle size, and then deliver it with a dry powder nasal device is massively increased interest in the delivery of these types of molecules into the nose. I mean, in many ways, the regulatory considerations in some ways are similar to with pulmonary delivery. So, first off, these nasal products, it's a combination. It's a combination of the formulation, the drug in its formulated form, and the device, and how the two come together and perform. So it's a drug device combination. So in the first instance, you're interested in how that device is going to deliver the drug. A key regulatory requirement is to show consistency of delivery, that the drug coming out the device, the liquid or a powder, delivers the right dose. Again, time after time for multi-dose devices, the right dose is delivered, but also that the drug coming out is stable. So there's lots of stability requirements. All these requirements require the combination of the right drug formulation with the device and the performance of that device. So it's critical that the two go together. So as I've mentioned, performance, delivery, and then drilling down into that, looking at the actual droplets or particles that come out the device to make sure they're the right size, that the right plume geometries. There's a whole host of different type of regulatory and testing requirements that are needed to show device performance, device stability. But one of the new areas that I'm seeing now in nasal drug delivery is what happens to those droplets or those particles when they come out the device. With pulmonary delivery into the lung, there's already existing techniques and tests where you can test to see where the powders or the liquids coming out of the device deposit in the lung. We use a piece of equipment called the next generation impactor. It's an FDA approved method for testing deposition. But those tests don't really exist in nasal drug delivery. We just literally look at the spray, look at the particle size, and then away you go. But now there's more and more interest in looking at where they go actually in the nose. And that's the new and growing area that the regulators and researchers are now looking at, developing new models for looking at deposition, because the nasal anatomy is actually quite complex. You might think it's just the nose, but it breaks down into different regions. You've got the vestibule, you've got the olfactory region, you've got the turbinates if you're targeting systemic delivery, and then at the back of the nose you've got the nasopharynx if you're looking at delivery of vaccines. So there are different targets within the nose, and understanding whereabouts in the nose you're targeting and how much of your dose is being delivered into those different areas is currently it's a very interesting scientific question. But more and more, I think the regulators are now going to start asking, whereabouts in the nose is your drug going? And also from a safety perspective, can you model what goes through the nose and ends up in the lung? Because for nasal drug delivery, we don't want the drug in the lung, we want it in the nose. And there's been some recent, over the last year or so, there's been some recent new regulations coming out of the FDA about how we can measure the safety and deposition of drugs in the nose, and also at the same time measure what's going into the lung. And that's really helping developers now set a target and set a specification on how these new nasal drug products are performing. I think for nasal, it's slightly different to pulmonary, for example. Obviously, everybody probably in the industry knows about some of the ongoing challenges in the pulmonary sector, looking at propellants, for example, in metered dose inhalers and what impact they can have on the environment. But really, for nasal, we're primarily looking at liquid and dry. By liquid, I mean aqueous formulations and dry powder formulations. And the environmental impact of the dose itself isn't so bad. It's not so great. We don't use these propellants. Sustainability is probably more around the device, and we've seen over the last year or so, particularly in the dry powder area, the emergence of single-use dry powder devices, primarily for use in rescue, in emergency situations where you can fire a single dry powder dose into a patient that needs a rescue drug. The challenge there then becomes, well, if it's a one-shot device, you've got a lot of plastic, you're going to fire that device. Fully understand that in an emergency setting, but for chronic use, where you're dosing 2 or 3 times a day, you don't want a fridge full of devices where you're going to pick them up, use them, and throw it away. From a sustainability perspective, that's not ideal by any stretch. So now we're seeing the emergence of new multi-dose dry powder devices coming into development and onto the market. And really, from a sustainability perspective, this is really exciting because we're getting, from in the industry, we're seeing more and more interest in dry powder formulations, delivering these next generation biologics that we discussed earlier into the nose. But the fact that a lot of those dry powder devices are single dose raises this sustainability challenge or the issue. But now we're seeing the emergence of multi-dose devices. I think that'll really answer some of those and put people's minds at rest around sustainability, but also open up new avenues and new sort of opportunities for nasal drug delivery.